The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kendo UI R2 2019 release webinar. My name's John. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us here to hear more about the great release that we've added to our line of products from Telerik. Joining me today in today's webinar are Eric and Carl, and together we're going to be spending the next hour looking at the various parts and pieces of Kendo UI, specifically what's new for the frameworks of jQuery, Angular, React, and Vue. Before we begin, I'd like to just let you know that we've published all of the information regarding the Kendo UI release up on our website. If you do a search for what's new Kendo UI, you'll find a page that looks like this. This is a summary page that features all the new updates to Kendo UI, including a breakdown of each update for each framework we support. In addition to that, I want to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and published to our YouTube channel. So if you miss anything or you want to show someone really cool features of Kendo UI, you can go ahead and go to this webpage and take a look at the video that we'll be publishing there. In addition to that, we've also published previous webinars, including the most recent one that we've done on Kendo React. Our YouTube channel can be found at youtube.com/KendoUITV. Also, I'd like to let you know that all the information regarding the release has been written up by Carl in a series of blog posts. You can find these up on our blogs, which is at telerik.com/blogs. And also, I'd like to make sure that you're aware of the hashtag we have called HeyKendoUI. This is one of two locations where you can get answers to your questions. The other location, of course, is within the GoToWebinar control panel, which is available to you through this webinar. If you pose your question there, folks from our engineering team, as well as myself, Carl, and Eric will be answering questions as they come up during this webinar. We want to make sure that we answer your questions, so please pose them there. So let's get right into it. The R2 release for UI is completely action-packed. There's a ton of great new features we've added. And what I'd like to do now is invite Carl, the PM for Kendo UI, to talk a little bit about some of the highlights that we have in our R2 release. Carl?
Thank you, John. So as you can see here, we have quite a lot of features and new components coming at you really across the entire suite of products within the Kendo UI bundle. So starting from left to right, let's take a look at some jQuery components. We'll be diving into this a little bit more, of course, throughout this webinar, but just to give you the highlights, we introduced two new components this release, the PDF viewer, which as the name gives away, allows you to view and interact with PDFs right within your web applications, as well as a standalone drawer widget that works for desktop web applications just as well as it does mobile, hybrid, or even PWAs, of course, as we go down that road. Additionally, we took a look at a lot of our existing components and decided what are some of the top requested features across the board. So looking at the spreadsheet, we came up with a ton of improvements there. The list view, we received endless scrolling, which has actually been the top requested feature in the feedback portal. And then we also went and added data binding into the menu and updated our support for jQuery to the latest version with 3.4.0 support. On the Angular side, we came out with the new color picker component, and then we spent a lot of time on focusing on two major components, so the scheduler and the editor. So these are no small components, and throughout the last couple of months, we've added a ton of features and functionality into these components, ensuring that existing users and new users alike can take advantage of what we're releasing. On top of that, we of course have grid improvements. Every release has some additional features around the grid that we want to be able to introduce, as well as various improvements to the drop-down components across the board, and even accessibility updates with WCAG 2.1. Now on the React side of the house, this library introduced a ton of new components. So that includes the editor, datetime picker, notification slider, standalone sortable and draggable frameworks, which have previously just been internally into our components. Now we're offering them as generic components to everybody. And then we've added new features into the grid and into the tree view. So for example, drag and drop and checkbox selection has been added into the tree view. On the view side of the house, we continue to introduce enhance the native library that we have for view, specifically with the native data grid. And we've also gone ahead and the same endless scrolling feature that we added into the jQuery edition, we've been able to add into the view edition of the same component. And that's kind of what we have for some of the highlights, and John and Eric will be able to take you through some of the more specifics for each one of these.
Great, Carl. Awesome stuff. And I assume all of these also include bug fixes and additional improvements that have been made to the overall framework, correct?
Exactly.
Awesome.
So this is just a quick little highlight on top of a lot of additional features that we're adding in.
Perfect. Well, there's no better way to get started than jumping right in. So let's get started by looking at some of the new features we've added to Kendo UI for jQuery. Kendo UI for jQuery is a very mature component library available for developers utilizing jQuery as a dependency. It's been around for a very long time, features over 70 components, and is a great tool set for building applications for the web. As Carl alluded to, we have a lot of great new features in here, which we'll highlight. And let's begin our journey by taking a look at the new PDF viewer component. This is a component that we've designed that will let your users view and interact with PDF files right in the browser. And this can be initially bound to a PDF file if you'd like, or a user can open a file from their machine and view within the component itself. They can also load the file, a PDF file if they're working with one, and open it up with a single button click. The interface, it should be noted that most of our controls are fully responsive and adaptive, and so they're able to adjust, obviously, to the viewport sizes and characteristics of each viewport that's available, which means that you can add the PDF viewer component to display PDF files on a mobile device. And so this initial version is going to support that, and obviously as we add support for it going forward for other capabilities, obviously that will expand on those features. When it comes to processing PDF documents, you have a couple of choices. You can either use a document library called pdf.js, which is something that we can integrate within the PDF viewer component, or you can use what we have called the Telerik document processing library, which is allowing you to view PDF files and work with Office documents. So the way that you'll initialize this using PDF.js is you'll simply include it as a dependency, including the other dependencies you have for Kendo UI. You'll then set it up as a worker source for the PDF document itself. And then with most of the Kendo UI components for our jQuery suite, you'll simply designate a target element, in this case, the div element that you see here called PDF viewer. To initialize this, it's pretty simple. There's an API call to Kendo PDF viewer, and there you'll provide the configuration for specifying the file in which you want to display to the end user. In addition to all of the configuration, you'll have a whole set of events that you can also trigger as well. So when a document is opened, or when it's rendered, or if there's an error when processing the document, you have the ability of capturing those events and handling them accordingly. And as part of the event args, we provide a whole slew of a variety of properties that you can also query as well. So let's take a look at an example using the PDF viewer. So like all good examples, we've got some great demos up on our demos page. If this is not a home page for you, make it a bookmark at demos.telerik.com. And there we have, I think a lot of you have seen this before. We have some new, obviously some new demos here. So this is the PDF viewer. This is a great little component that allows you to view these documents in line within your browser. And so you can see here, I'm basically paging through documents, and there's a number of ways in which you can integrate this, but it turns out to be a pretty simple way of utilizing this control. So the PDF viewer, it's a great little control, and going forward should provide some great functionality for your users. Let's talk a little bit about the drawer now. So this is another new component we've added to Kendo UI for jQuery, and if you're not familiar with it, it's a little component that allows you to expand and collapse a click event. Some people will refer to this as a member, and usually it's on the left or right hand side of a page, and it's a way of basically shifting out navigation. So outside of the ability to just show or hide the menu, it can be done in a modal way, or you can push the existing content to the side. And so it gives you a lot of customization within the control itself, and it also supports a variety of features like templates. In addition to that, we also have a mini mode, which allows you to show the menu, but only rendering the icons that you have. So this is an example of what you see here. To initialize the drawer is pretty simple. You simply designate the toolbar at the top, which is where you'll put your icons. And then underneath, you'll specify a drawer with the variety of different content items that you want to display on an expansion. So in the previous example, mimicking a mailbox, you see here we have an inbox or notifications content area. And then the way in which we show or have these is based on a class property that we can designate through a variety of API calls. To initialize this, we'll simply call the API Kendo drawer. We can provide a template if we so wish. We can also specify things like the mode, as well as whether or not we want to render it in that mini mode that we talked about earlier. For click events and other types of events, you can certainly set up handlers for each one of those. And alternatively, you can perform a gesture, a touch gesture, a swipe to open up elements as well. The toolbar itself will be initialized utilizing the Kendo toolbar API, and there you can specify a variety of other aspects for that, such as the menu icons that you saw previously. So let's take a look at another example of the drawer widget here. And our drawer widget is available under the navigation section. So you can see this is the previous example that I showed you earlier. In the example I was using, it was utilization for this drawer based on the expansion. So in mini mode, we'll simply show the icons, but I can expand that out, of course. And there's a variety of other capabilities that you can use for this. The initialization for this is pretty simple. If you're familiar at all with some of the other widgets we have in Kendo UI for jQuery, it's a great little widget for you to use and incorporate within your application going forward. As Carl alluded to, we have a lot of great features to the spreadsheet component. This is a very popular component that we've added some support to, and these are items that we saw based on our our feedback that we got from customers like you. So specifically, we've added things like the ability to add image support and provide events and add cell comments and such. So if you haven't seen the spreadsheet component before, this is what it looks like. It's a fully featured sort of control, supports a variety of capabilities that you would come to expect in a spreadsheet. And it's a great control for you to use within your application because it eludes you of having to use a spreadsheet application. You can embed it directly within a web page, for example. And utilizing that control, you can provide a variety of operations as part of that widget. So as I alluded to, we have new features such as image support. So now you can add images to any cell within your spreadsheet. This also includes dragging them around the surface area. You can put them in the exact location you want. And of course, any image that you add will be part of the file that you export. So if you choose to export this later on, it will be part of that. The way in which you'll support this is simply by changing your configuration a little bit. So this is an API we have available for initializing the Kendo spreadsheet. Here we'll specify an image. This is a reference image on the server. And then we can embed that image by simply specifying it within our drawings collection. So our drawings collection there is specifying that we have an image, which is referenced there at cell E3. And then you can give it an XY offset as well if you wish. Another feature we've added to the spreadsheet is the ability to add cell comments. So this is basically allowing your end users to add comments to any cells that are in the spreadsheet, and they can also review those comments after the fact if they so wish. Adding comments is also pretty trivial. You can embed them as part of the configuration if you wish, or through an action, you can embed them directly through an API call as well. There's a number of ways in which you can do this. This is an example of adding a comment to a spreadsheet. So by adding this directly, it's available through the API and you can inject them there. Another feature request we had from a lot of users was they wanted to get a lot more insight into the type of events that are being generated by the spreadsheet. So you can see here, as I'm working with the spreadsheet, it would be nice to know what sort of events that have been occurring on the spreadsheet itself. And there are a variety of reasons why developers would like these. There's a number of new events that we've added. Some you see here, so we have a variety of events like changing events, any events regarding data binding or whether something is data bound, copy, cut, paste, etc. These are all types of events that you can now capture and handle as part of the spreadsheet widget going forward. So taking a look at another example of the spreadsheet demo. So again, you'll find this up on our components page, and spreadsheet is a very popular control, as I mentioned earlier. Here's an example of utilizing an image embedded within the spreadsheet itself. Notice that I can move the image around as well. I mentioned cell comments before, being able to edit and embed these directly through an API call. And of course, all the events that are important to you as a developer in order to being able to capture these events, change, modify values, embed other types of cell values, possibly. These and other types of events are now exposed to you. And as I mentioned before, there's a variety of you can now use going forward. Sticking with Kendo UI for jQuery, another great feature we've added going forward is the ability to provide endless scrolling to the list view. This is a great feature, especially when you don't know how much data is going to be bound, and if you're binding to a remote data source or local data source in that matter. And being able to scroll provides a nice usability feature for end users as part of the list view experience. Enabling this is pretty simple. You simply enable the value scrollable equal to endless. And so basically you can continue to scroll, and we'll pick up the data that's bound through the data source property that you have bound to the widget itself. Taking a look at this for endless scrolling here, just quickly. So again, coming back here for the demo itself. So our list view is under data management. And you can see we have the support for endless scrolling as part of this experience. This example here, utilizing a data source as part of the list view itself. And so I can go ahead and simply scroll through the items, and as they appear within the viewport, they will be rendered out accordingly. You can take a look at the DevTools experience through the network tab and see those being picked up as they scroll through. Another feature we've added is some improvements to our mobile and adaptive rendering. So this is important if you're a developer who's thinking about building applications for supporting desktop as well as mobile web applications. And so when you're considering things like responsive design, or you're building out PWAs, these are things that are going to be very important. And specifically, there's a number of features we've added here, but we've added characteristics around things like the grid to support this. So when you're rendering out a control, such as the grid itself, it's important that you be able to see certain columns. And so we can actually account for that based on the type of viewport or device that you're viewing the content on. So this is an example of the grid being utilized in the adaptive rendering capabilities we've now added to support mobile devices. In addition to that, when you're working with some of the filtering and ordering capabilities of the grid itself, it might be useful to have a settings dialog that is obviously rendering well on mobile, and we've done just that. So this is showing you the adaptive mobile rendering for the grid, utilizing the column settings that are present there. The same can also be done for the scheduler. So we've added some capabilities around the scheduler as well. So the scheduler now supports the ability to have an adaptive rendering. And as you can see, you can utilize the embedded native UI controls for the scheduler when rendering out in a mobile device. This also applies to the timeline view. So this is a view that we also have available in the scheduler. To configure this is pretty simple. Simply setting the mobile property to true will automatically enable that. That's one example. You can also set it to the value phone or tablet if you wish, and what that will allow you to do is render that using the mobile rendering or the adaptive rendering for a specific device. It may not be known to some of you, but there's actually a great set of utilities found in the kendo.support namespace, if you think about it that way, that is available there. One of them is mobile OS. This is a Boolean value that we can determine if you're actually rendering out on mobile. There are other APIs you can call as well. If you're wanting to do a check, a Boolean check to see whether or not we're in a mobile viewport, you can do that, and then call resize on the control after it's been configured to basically incorporate the adaptive rendering. So taking a look at another example of our new features in the scheduler and the grid. So we can see that in the scheduler component, we've added our adaptive rendering capability. so use screen, use the QR code to scan, and it will pull up on the device, and it will simply look like what I showed you here earlier, these viewports that you see here. We've added some other capabilities specifically around Kendo UI for jQuery. So obviously the menu is a feature that is utilized by a lot of developers. The menu is a great sort of widget for basically coalescing a lot of data and information in a widget that allows you to navigate very easily through your application. And so now this is sort of a long-awaited feature that we've added, the ability to bind to both local and remote data for the widget. So the menu now can bind to that data very easily. And as Carl alluded to, jQuery 3.4 is out and available, and so we've added support for that. So in summary, lots of great stuff for Kendo UI for jQuery, and going forward, I think developers are really going to appreciate the features we've added there. If you want a summary of all the features, Carl's written a blog post, and that's available up on our blogs. It's entitled What's New in R2 2019 for Kendo UI and jQuery, which summarizes all the features I just highlighted. All right, so no rest for the wicked. Let's move on to Kendo UI for Angular. So Kendo UI for Angular, another great library we have specifically for Angular developers. These are native controls built for Angular itself, and we've added a lot of great new features in the Kendo UI for Angular library. So you can see some of these features include new components, specifically the color picket, but we've also added a number of enhancements specifically to the scheduler and the editor, which are two very popular components that we have in Kendo UI for Angular. So let's start with the color picker. The color picker is a simple but powerful component that allows you to basically select a color that you wish to denote or utilize inside of an application. The reason why this is important for some developers, obviously, is because colors can be represented in a number of different ways. This is a pretty useful component when you're wanting to pick a color, and so you can utilize a number of ways in which this can be incorporated. To incorporate this on a page, simply utilize the element Kendo-color picker. There's a variety of events that you can capture as part of that. So, for example, values changing, whether or not it's been opened, or whether it's been closed, etc. And these and other types of events you can capture and incorporate the return types as part of the value set. So we can take a look at a demo here, but I'm going to just go ahead for time's sake. Just skip that. You can take a look at that up on our demo site. But I want to jump into some of the other features we've added, namely the scheduler, which is one of the bigger components that we have inside Kendo UI or Angular. A lot of folks are using this. It's great. Now, the scheduler itself, when it was first introduced, was sort of had a minimal feature set, but we've been working really hard on adding a lot of features to this component, and I'm really pleased with what we've added specifically to it. So one of the things that a lot of developers have been asking us for is the ability to resize events, and so now we have the capability of doing just that. So your users can now navigate to the scheduler and resize accordingly. Another feature we've added is to do things like drag and drop, etc. The ability to resize event is supported through a number of events that you see here. I can capture I can write handlers for when an event is resized, or the start or the end of that resize event itself. So I can do various things with that if I wish. As I mentioned before, we can also drag and drop events. This is useful when you're wanting to move things around. So in that sort of vein, modifying events directly. So I can go ahead and capture a variety of events associated with this as well. So if, as a user drags or starts or ends the drag event, I can capture and handle those events accordingly through handlers that I write as well. Another feature is a sort of view that we have called multi-day. We also have work week views as well. So the multi-day allows us to view in a very concise format the types of items that are within a scheduler component. This is very similar to what you'll see in calendar clients like Outlook or Google Calendar. And the ability to switch these views turns out to be really useful for end users. So we're really happy to add this support for the scheduler component in Kendo UI for Angular. The ability to support this is done through a series of elements that you'll add. These are just simply part of the root element for Kendo Scheduler. So if I wanted to, I could add a multi-day view, specifying the number of days as well. I also specify the work week view as well, simply by adding that element underneath as well. Another capability we have in the scheduler is the ability to export to PDF. So this is something that a lot of customers like to use, especially when they have very complex schedules and calendars like I do. And so this allows you to export the current view to a PDF document simply through the click of a single button. So you can customize this button if you wish, but basically this is a button that allows you to trigger an event that will export it out as a PDF. And you can do that very, very easily. The support for this is easily added simply by adding a template, which is for the button itself. And then from there, it will export the file using the file name that you denote through the element Kendo Scheduler PDF. So by specifying that configuration, it will output the document accordingly with that file type. All right, let's move on to the editor. So the editor is a very new component for us in Kendo UI for Angular. We've added a ton of new enhancements and features to it in the R2 2019 release. So some of the enhancements we've added include things like inserting images, inserting files, viewing the content in HTML, localization, right to left support, and other features like that. So lots and lots of great new features added to the editor component in Kendo UI for Angular. And these features will continue to grow as we continue to evolve this component going forward. So let's take a look at a quick example of that, of the editor itself, and just showing you some examples of some of the demos we've written. These are available up in StackBlitz, so you can take a look at things like the color picker, some of the features we've added to the editor, etc. So here's the editor. You can see a variety of commands that I utilize within the control structure itself. So I can embed images, I can view the HTML content for this. So there's a lot of features now available in the editor. I would strongly encourage you to go check this out. The editor itself is very customizable and will certainly suit your needs if you're looking to embed a rich text editing experience within your application. So moving on to the grid, which is again, another popular component, and developers really like grids. It allows you to put a lot of data within a tight area, and sometimes real estate in an application is hard to come by. So any features we can add to the grid are good. And so we've added some capabilities like endless scrolling, which provides a new way for users to scroll through large sets of data within the grid itself. And so as more data is being loaded, the grid itself will implement a sliding window mechanism that will pull down new data accordingly when we hit the bottom. All the features that you have in the grid, such as filtering, sorting, grouping, they can be used within this mode of scrolling. But if you need, you can add other capabilities as well. So for example, if you want, you can add other features within the grid itself to obviously your users' requirements. Obviously, if you're utilizing a mode like this, the need for a pager, for example, is not necessary, but lots of capability found within the grid with this feature enabled. To enable this, it's simply a call to a binding here for scroll bottom. That is the element that, that is the event binding that's encountered when the grid itself reaches the end of its list. And then we'll simply call the next call to load more in this instance here for loading data slice by slice. So this will allow me to fetch the next number of items that I need in order to load within my grid. Some other improvements we've added to the grid, these include cell spanning. This is a feature that allows you to support spanning of cells in both the same row as well as the same column. So we know those as column spanning and row spanning. And we also have the ability to support the expand collapse functionality within an Excel document. So if we're exporting to Excel, we can now add this capability within that capability or in that functionality going forward. The ability to add this is pretty simple. There's an element within the Kendo Grid element called Kendo Grid Excel. Simply denote the file name, which is the export file name that you're going to export to. And then there's a binding for the collapsible property here, which if you set as true will allow you to support that capability. We've added a number of capabilities also to our drop-down group. So two big updates. One is grouping, and the other one, which is coming soon, is virtualization. So these are highly requested features that obviously customers have been asking for, and I'm happy to let everyone know that we're adding those accordingly. And of course, accessibility is always a top feature of ours, and it's something that we take very seriously within our team, and Kendo UI for Angular is no exception. So we work very hard to make sure that our components are compatible with the variety of accessibility standards out there, Section 508, ARIA standards that are available. So we're working really hard on compliance, and we're happy to obviously add compliance for WCAG 2.1. And again, if you want to find out a summary of all the new features we've added to Kendo UI for Angular, Carl has also written a blog post that highlights those capabilities individually. All right, so now would be time for us to take a look at some of the capabilities we've added to Kendo React, which is our UI library for React. And to do that, I'd like to invite Eric, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what is new in Kendo React. Eric, take it away.
All right. Let's make sure you guys can see my screen now.
Yeah, we're all good.
All right. Thank you, John. As he said, we've just released the Kendo React R2 release. And actuality, we've been releasing these components for quite some time. We don't have a really specific release date, so always check up onto the components page to see what's been released the current week or month. So Kendo React is our built from the ground up, zero dependencies on jQuery framework that we have for React.js users. We leverage the experience from our other Kendo libraries to provide rich and powerful native UI and data visualization components, specifically for React.js. If you'd like, you can check out more information over on kendoreact.com. Here you'll also find buttons to get over to our components page, where you'll find information on all of our components. We've made a lot of headway in creating parity with the other Kendo React libraries that you already know and love. And as you can see here, in the last year, we've rolled out a ton of new components and features. This is all of them here. All of the components that you see here have amazing StackBlitz demos inside of our documentation to go along with them. This way, you never have to wonder how to set up our Kendo React components in a React.js project. We've got a lot of examples of how to do that, as well as a lot of StackBlitz demos of kind of edge cases and kind of features that might be a little bit harder to implement. We usually have those there for you. While you're on the kendoreact.com site, you can also check out our free 30-day trial that allows you to take Kendo React for a spin for an entire month with our full support package. And so let's get on to the actual updates and the new components. Here's a quick list of those items that we've released in the R2 period. And we'll just get right into some of the demos here, starting with the editor. So our editor, just as with the other libraries, enables you to create rich textual content using a WYSIWYG interface. What you see is what you get interface. So you can do, easily with both keyboard and with the mouse, select, highlight, bold, italicize, underline. All this stuff is made very easily and is accessible also. And what I'm going to show you here is we have a little toolbar up at the top left-hand corner for this specific editor. And I wanted to show you really quickly in code how we go about adding those tools, and you'll also see how to kind of implement the editor in code in this next slide. One thing I'll point out here is that we're making available the content that is being worked on inside of your editor, and you can get that HTML at any time as well as set that HTML. So that's a really cool feature. Here is a nice little example of how you would use that editor and how you would kind of create it in code. And we have lots of, again, Stackblitz demos to show you how to do this. But if you look at the top here, we are destructuring some items, some tools that we've imported from the editor tools, and then basically just passing those in as an array of arrays into our tools prop. So that, again, creates just one toolbar section with a bold, italic, and underlined tool. Here you'll see a little bit more of an advanced toolbar. You've got several groups of tools, and let's go into an example of kind of how you would do that in code. So as you can see here, it looks very similar to the code example before. You're, again, destructuring a bunch of items from the editor tools, and then just providing them each within a specific array. So each one of these arrays will end up being one of those different groups of toolbars at the top there. So very easy to implement. One of my favorite components so far, editor, and the date time picker, which is also something that's new. So a lot of times you need to do more than just add a date. You need to be able to add a date with time. And so this example that you're seeing here is actually me doing just that. And I will note that I'm only using the keyboard controls here. I think it's really cool that all of our components are very accessible and are very easy to use, just with tabbing over to the input, moving around with the forward and backward keyboard arrows, and then enter to select. It's all very, very easy. Here's our notification demo. Nothing too crazy, but it's good that things like this are available out of the box from Kendo React, because these things, even though they're fairly simple, do take a lot of time to create as developers and to include into your application. Here we've got them all ready to go for you, and we make it very highly customizable. You can change all the colors to fit your application. So yeah, very, very happy with the notifications and the styles of them. Sometimes I get a UI library, the notifications are just either I don't like them or they're very hard to kind of customize, and this is not that case. The slider. So our slider is an interesting and helpful input component. If you have the need to input a number from a defined range, you can control the step. As you see in this demo, only some of the numbers are shown as labels, but we can make much more fine-grained selections by controlling the step at which you can step through those numbers. So even though we're only showing 1, 3, 5, 7, 10, you can select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 just by kind of going back and forth with your mouse, or using your, going back and forth with your keyboard or using your mouse. As well, you can see I'm kind of going back and forth from the code in the demo here, and I'm changing either the vertical or adding or removing the buttons just to kind of show you how easy that is. One thing I would note is that these types of decisions and props that are getting passed in to either the vertical or the buttons, these can be controlled with responsive behavior. So maybe you show the slider in a vertical mode at one breakpoint, and at horizontal in another. And again, all of our components make it very easy to do that kind of thing. Here's another example of the slider, horizontal slider, which I've started off with no labels, but to go in and actually add that label in is very simple, as you see there. As well, if you want to show the actual value that you're currently selected on, that'll show up here in the demo in just a moment. Let's go ahead and give that a second. So since we're controlling it with state, you can see that in order to show that, I'm just adding a little nice big red piece of text, and then we'll add, this.state.value, and that will give us, the actual number that we have selected as a user. Pretty cool. The next two components I'm going to show you are the sortable and the draggable. And actually the sortable contains the draggable, but what the sortable does is it gives you the ability to reorder a list, which is something that is very, very helpful in an application. As well, you have access to the output of this list at any time so that you can maybe save that back to document database or a SQL database and update the order of items that are in a list. So I'm really happy with this, and I think it's a great addition. As well, here is just the simple draggable component that you can make any item draggable, pictures, text, any object that you want to make draggable, you can use this component here. That's most of the new components that we have, but now what I want to show you, first I'm going to show you something that we already have, which is the virtual scroll in our grid component. And I'm just going to get right into inspecting this to show you how I've only set it to show 10 rows at a time, and you can see that only those 10 rows that I'm currently scrolled to will ever show up and get rendered to the DOM at any one point in time. The reason that I show you this older feature is because if we look at this new feature, the column virtualization, together, the both of them make a very, very nice and performant grid. So as you can see, what I'm about to do right here is drag from the left to the right. And now we're not only virtualizing in the Y direction, but also now in the X direction with columns. And if we inspect that, we can just see that each row only shows the cells that are actually required and on screen at the time. To activate this for both directions, it's pretty easy. We just add these two props right here, column virtualization equals true, and scrollable equals virtual. A few other things that we've added to other components. As you saw, we were adding drag and drop capabilities to things, and we also added that here in the tree component. You can actually move items around into a different part of the tree structure, and you'll also have access to the output just as you did with the lists. But yeah, you can actually take a whole section and drop it into another category, and as you can see here, it's very easily done. We also have added the ability to add check marks to our tree list as well, and there's lots of great demos, Stackblitz demos on these features, and even more advanced features like being able to select a parent element or tree item and get all of its child items selected. So we make sure that we don't just drop this stuff on your lap and make you figure out how to use it. We actually give you the tools that you need and the demos that you need to know exactly how to do these things. A lot of the stuff that's coming up can be seen in our roadmap. If you want to screenshot this page, I'll leave it up for a second. One of the things that I'm looking forward to is the scheduler component. So if you saw the scheduler component that John was showing from Angular, as well we have in the jQuery library, which looks a little bit like this. This is the material version of that. That's on our roadmap and hopefully coming out very soon. Before I leave you, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about blogs.telerik.com. Just know that there's lots of good content there about React and Kendo React, as well as blogs about us and what we're doing in the community. You'll also find Carl's blog about what's new in Kendo React with R2, which is a great read through, and it'll give you even more information that I showed you just now. And if you want to find all that information, you can screenshot this guy right here or copy it down. And on this page, I'll have all the links to everything from our Kendo React webinar from Tuesday, as well as some of the stuff I've talked about today. Again, my name is Eric Bichard. I'm the developer advocate for Kendo React. You can reach me at any time on Twitter and just reach out to me, and I'd love to answer your questions. And thank you very much. I'll pass it back to John at this time.
Thanks, Eric. Really appreciate that. That's awesome to see. I'm just going to switch it over to my screen here, and we'll continue onward with some news around Kendo UI for Vue. So for developers using Vue, Kendo UI for Vue is a great UI library, offers a whole wealth of components, native components for Vue that you can use. And in the R2 2019, we've added a lot of features to Kendo UI, and I'm really excited to talk about those here. Specifically, we've added some capabilities to the grid component, which is a super popular component. Should be noticed as a native Vue grid. It performs really, really well, And in addition to the improvements we've made over the past couple of releases, we've added some features in here that allow you to take the grid to the next level. So the grid itself is pretty performant, and one of the reasons why is it supports virtualization. Virtualization is a capability, obviously, that allows you to have a very good footprint within the browser itself. And one of the capabilities that was missing from the grid up until this latest release was being able to support virtualization when data is grouped. So now I'm happy to report that the latest version of the grid, you can now work with both of these features, that is group data as well as virtualization within the group, within the grid component going forward, which is great to hear. Another capability, obviously, that is really powerful is column virtualization, and that is a feature that we've also added as part of that. And so virtualization around columns is another feature. The feature you're seeing here, obviously, is a little different. This is the ability to freeze or lock columns. This is really useful in a scenario where you're working within tight confines of a viewport. And so this is a capability we've added to the grid in Kendo UI for View. This is basically very useful if you're wanting to make sure that certain columns always appear on the screen. And I think a lot of developers will really like this feature. The ability to add this capability is pretty simple. So if declaring the grid within a view application here, we can simply specify whether or not we want to provide the ability to lock certain columns based on style, or whether or not we wish to reorder them accordingly as part of the design itself. So in this example here, I'm denoting the configuration for the grid. Specifically, I'm specifying whether or not certain columns are locked through the locked Boolean. I can also denote the width for each column as well, which will obviously come into play when taking a look at the frozen or locked columns perspective of a view that's within a smaller confines. The list view is another component that got an update in Kendo UI for View. So now we support endless scrolling, which is obviously a great capability if you're utilizing data that comes from possibly a remote location. And so to show that off, I'm just going to jump into a quick demo here. Again, these demos, like the ones we have in Kendo React, Kendo UI for Angular, etc., these are all available up on StackBlitz. So this is an example of our virtualization that is now supported within data that is being grouped. So you can see here I have a group specified for the grid itself for units in stock as well as category name, and I can utilize the virtualization capabilities within the grid for that going forward, which is great. Looking at our frozen or locked columns demo, you can see here I've specified certain columns to remain always visible within the locked sort of setting. And so by specifying a column here to be locked, I can make sure that it's always present whether a user is scrolling left or right. I can also denote things like column widths as well. So really, really nice capability for users using grids within the tight confines of a viewport. And again, if you want to get a summary of all the great new features we've added to Kendo UI for View, you can go ahead and check out Carl's blog post, which is up on our blog's site. So now I'd like to invite Carl to come back and join us to talk a little bit about the Kendo UI roadmap. Obviously, we've got a lot of great new features that are coming in the months ahead, and Carl obviously is going to give us a bit of an insight into what's coming there. Carl?
Yeah, thank you, John. So I don't necessarily have any big slide here that highlights everything, since we do have these roadmaps published online and we try to keep them up to date. However, for today's webinar, I wanted to just step through a little bit of what we're looking to do with all the different products within the Kendo UI bundle. So first of all, if we start thinking about the jQuery edition, right, we are going to be introducing more components into this library. So for example, a rating widget happens to be actually a pretty popular widget that we're looking to add with this upcoming release. We're also focusing a lot on some of the brand new components. So for example, the PDF viewer, we still have more that we want to do with the component. So we'll be seeing features and functionality added in there. We'll continue to add features and functionality to the spreadsheet. We want to show that component some more love, so that's going to be added in there as well. On the Angular side of the house, we're going to continue to improve the scheduler. In fact, we plan on bringing that component out of beta with the next couple of features that we're looking to add into the component. So we'll have a V1 of the scheduler, and we'll do a very similar thing with the editor, where we'll continue to build in tooling to be comfortable enough to drop the beta tag. And of course, we'll continue to add features and functionality into the grid. It's a very popular component, so we want to make sure that we can continue to work in that capacity. On the Angular side of the house as well, we already have initial support for Angular 8. However, we want to deepen that support as well. So with the preview edition of Ivy being out, we're looking into what we can do with Ivy and just looking to see what kind of deeper integration we can continue to do with the Angular framework itself. And we'll be introducing some additional new components, like, for example, the datetime picker and the drawer widget are going to be something that we'll be targeting for Angular. On the Vue side of the house will be, of course, any one of the features based on the wrapped edition of the Vue components. We'll be able to see the same features of functionality added into it as on the jQuery side, but we'll also be moving into releasing some additional new native components where possible, specifically looking into some of the form elements, and also be on the lookout for Vue 3.0 support. We know that's important, of course, to keep up to date there, so we'll have that as well on our target. On the React side of the house, Eric mentioned this a little bit, but we are going to be looking into adding the scheduler component, as well as a couple of other components like the color picker and drawer widget. On top of that, continue to add more features and functionality into the already pretty robust grid component, as well as continue down and add more features and functionality into the editor. So that's kind of a full little tour, I guess, of all the various libraries that we have. And of course, as mentioned, keep an eye out on the roadmap pages, since those will keep up to date, and of course be adding more features and functionality in there as we continue to go along.
Great, thanks, Carl. Wonderful stuff. And as Carl said, you can go up to our roadmap pages and get a sense of what's coming through all those things. Before we let you go, just wanted to remind you of a few other URLs you may not be aware of. Obviously, there's the Kendo UI homepage. Please make this a bookmark. Check it out. Lots of great demos there. All the insight and information we provide in this webinar is available there. All the demos we've mentioned, all the documentation. We're constantly updating this all the time. Eric mentioned this, I mentioned this, I'll mention it again. This is the one-stop shop for all the sort of knowledge-based articles that we're producing, our opinions, our insights on a variety of topics, including Angular 8 or the latest and greatest on React or what's happening in Vue. We write extensively about those topics up on our blog site, so go check that out at telerik.com/blogs. And then finally, there's our YouTube channel, which again, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted there, which is at the Kendo UI TV channel up on YouTube. And now what I'd like to do, and to kind of preface this with Carl and with Eric, we're going to take some of the questions that were asked over the past hour and answer them here, just so folks can get a better sense of the types of questions that have been asked. Carl, I'd like you to take a second and maybe think about some of the best questions that you've seen so far. And Eric, same goes with you. We did have a few questions regarding support for technologies like obviously ASP.NET, which is a very popular framework for .NET developers building out applications, and people have asked if we support that, and the answer is yes, totally. So we have a library that actually targets that, not just .NET framework for .NET, but also .NET Core. So we have UI components for that, and in addition to that, we make the development experience great with things like tag helpers and other capabilities like that. If you're building out pages using Razor syntax, we support that as well. So go check that out. All those components are driven by Kendo UI as the underlying plumbing. So that's a great question, and I hope folks go check that out, especially .NET developers going forward. Carl, if you have a question there, I'd love to hear it. Want something that maybe someone's asked and maybe other attendees might like to know the answer to?
Yeah, certainly. So one question popped up, that's actually popped up in a previous webinar as well, is what's the difference between virtual scrolling and infinite scrolling? So since we talked a little bit about infinite scrolling today, I wanted to just, again, kind of reiterate some of the differences there because it's a little bit nuanced. But virtual scrolling, which we have in all of our data-bound components, essentially, what that is just a calculation of essentially the total number of items that you have in, let's say, a grid. Without having a pager, you can see on the scroll bar just how much data you have remaining to scroll through. So you have a kind of an indication of just how big of a data set that you're dealing with. And on top of that, of course, from an end user perspective, they scroll, and then behind the scenes we load data, so you don't necessarily have to load all the data at once, and then we can also recycle some containers, etc. Infinite scrolling is a little bit different because that allows you to actually see the scroll bar of the current page set that you have. So if you have items, 100 items, whatever it might be, and then as you scroll down and the scroll bar hits the bottom of the page, you continue to load an additional page of data, and then the scroll bar sort of expands. So if you load the second page of data, the scroll bar will essentially be halfway through now, and you can continue to scroll down to the bottom, and then more data will be loaded. This is very common in scenarios like, for example, Pinterest and eBay's search, where you don't necessarily want to see just how many pages of data or how many data items exist total. In fact, it can the whole idea of fear of missing out or making the wrong decision can actually pop up when you see thousands of data items loaded. And instead, you only load more information as you get to the bottom of the screen. So it's just one other way of dealing with large data scenarios, and is often requested alongside with virtualization in the sense of it's either or. So just wanted to kind of mention some of the key differences there, since we talked about endless scrolling and infinite scrolling for quite a bit during this webinar.
Awesome stuff. Eric, was there a question that you thought might be good for React developers to hear a little bit more about that maybe someone has asked?
Nah, I'm still looking through all the comments here. Haven't seen anything particular on React, but if I do, I'll tweet it out and talk about it. Okay.
Perfect. All right. Well, obviously, if you have any questions, I would like to remind everyone to go check out, obviously, the variety of resources that we have available online. There's a wide variety of sources there that you can go check out, like our forums, our demos. Again, if you go to our website, you'll find access to all that information as well. Please feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using either the hashtag #HeyKendoUI, or reach out to either myself, Carl, or Eric. We're very happy to answer any questions you have. So with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us here for today's webinar. We're going to be posting the recording of this webinar up online at our YouTube channel. In addition to that, we're going to be following up this webinar with a blog post highlighting the questions that were asked, so that if you have a question that you've asked, you want to see a formal answer, we'll go ahead and write up an article for that. So thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you for future webinars in the not so distant future. Have a great day, folks.